Monday, December 20th, 2021. My name is Lori Kurtz, pronouns she, hers. Would you please introduce yourself, tell us your pronouns if you care to, and tell us all the things you do.
Alan Porowski, and I am currently teaching an at-risk program at the local high school called Catalyst, and also an art teacher. And I've probably had 40 jobs in my lifetime. So one of them was event producing in the Bay Area and DJing, and ran science camps in Golden Gate Park, and lots of stuff. And of course, Tease-O-Rama. So, and I would probably, before you ask your next question, say two things. One is future historians, if I'm gone when you're looking at this, just remember, so will you be one day. We have to all keep our existential awareness to make ourselves more alive. And secondly, I do want to say at some point, I hope you find, at least talk to Doe, baby Doe, who I'm still good friends with and in touch with, and we still do a lot together. Allison Fensterstock, the third original Tease-O-Rama person, I haven't seen in a while. She was a lot younger than us, and she was single, and she ended up getting married and went back to New York and dropped out early on. But a very interesting interview, also very much brought the feminist lens to the early days of Tease-O-Rama. So when that was still a unique thing, right? Like to separate from the 1950s version of what burlesque was. So. And we were all very different. All three of us had a very different approach to the universe. And I think that's what made us really interesting, kind of like the Beatles, just to put myself in better company than myself.
So you just referenced the 1950s burlesque and then the Tease-O-Rama burlesque. So what is burlesque?
Everyone's going to have their own opinion of that. For me, at the start, it was just another retro thing. It was the 90s, and we were all stuck between our adolescence and adulthood, and we were kind of looking around at the world and saying, God, there was all these old records and old books and old images that we were finding. And so we started with swing dancing in San Francisco and 1940s stuff, and then the tiki scene, and then the lounge scene and space age cocktail music. And then I got into Bardo a Go-Go, which was a show I created with a friend of mine from KALX in Berkeley. We were both DJs, and he was into this 60s French music, which none of us had ever heard of. And he was flying to France and coming back with these really cool records. And so this was just another thing. There was a point where I was putting on so many shows, people were just coming up to me and going, I always wanted to do this. And if it was interesting, I would go, yeah, let's do that. And then I would come up with a name, and I would plug everyone into clubs and kind of get stuff set up. And so Brian, the Fisherman, Lease, came up to me and said, I just saw these women down in LA, and they did this old-fashioned burlesque show. And I said, that sounds cool. Let's do it. And then he went, am I jumping ahead a question?
No,
okay. He went and he hand scored a whole night of music, because he could play a bunch of different instruments. His main instrument is a vibraphone, but he put together a band of just crack San Francisco musicians and found these old records and then wrote out the parts note by note just from listening to the records. It was astonishing. And we brought this troupe up from Los Angeles, and I'm totally blanking on their names. You know
Is
them.
that the Velvet
Hammer? Thank
Hammer,
you. Yes, yeah, Penny and all that. Yeah. So they were like a package. It was all ready to go. There was about a half a dozen of them. And then I just did my thing, which was I went out and I found old images of just the cornier the better of, those guys in baggy suits and telling this horrible Borscht Belt jokes, and some it wouldn't fly today, but it was just funny and campy. And And I was really obsessed with the word orama. My high school friend and I both had this. It was our thing, back in the 70s and 80s. We would attach orama to things. And there was cinerama and bowl-orama. And so I thought, well, what is this? This is really about teasing somebody. So how about Tease-O-Rama? And then, of course, I knew the Betty Page movie Tease-O-Rama. And I ended up becoming friends with the guy who owned the rights to that. He passed away, but something weird video. So anyway, it's all convoluted, but that's kind of how it got going. And I just created giant old-fashioned posters. And what I loved was the alliteration, right? So I would find those, mystical magic and mirth and mayhem. And you can see it on our earliest poster, the one from 97. It's got lots of alliteration. And I should have brought you my press releases, because the whole reason I did half of this was to write the press releases, because they were hysterically funny. So maybe someday I'll make a book of my press releases. 2 people will read it, but they'll be highly entertained.
And you're saying, you said those jokes and the sensibility wouldn't fly today. What has changed?
Well, of course, we were never, we never came out of that. It was never about sex, right? Because I'm working at the time when it was just Brian and I. It was just San Francisco, and it was campy, and we were punk rock, and it was just like, what can we do that's outrageous and fun? And it was about learning how to dress up and wear those clothes. And and then when the women came in, they looked like the women that we grew up looking at in Playboys behind somebody's tree fort, and somebody's dad had these. And so very different than what women look like in the 80s and 90s, where it became very corporate and very there wasn't a lot of human warmth. It was prepackaged. It was a certain thinness, a certain look. And then here are these just outrageous, big, buxom women with crazy hair and makeup and all owning their own look. Like nobody's going, hey, toots, do this, right? Like all of that stuff. So for me, I come out of punk rock. And so it's all, and still as a teacher, everything I teach, I start with power. And tell my students, if you can understand power dynamics, everything in the world, what's happening to you on the quad, the way people are bullying you, the way the world is run, everything starts to make much more sense. And so I think even from the beginning, we were very conscious of that. I'm sure there's some moments where me as the male probably slipped up. But yeah, I think what's changed is probably we're more conscious, right, of the fact that everybody deserves a seat at the table, right? So that's what our country's going through right now, right? Is some people are not comfortable with that, thinking there's a pie and other people are taking pieces of the pie. I'm like, well, no, maybe with the oven still running and we're just making more pies, right? So who cares? Like, it's more fun. I mean, I lived in San Francisco and traveled the world for years. And it's more fun when everybody does their own thing.
So what is burlesque? I mean, how is it different than other performance art forms?
So I'm sure other people in your history say this better, especially the performers, but I know every single, especially the women, but every single person that I worked with in Tease-O-Rama was quick to say, this is not stripping. This is not stripping. This is theater, right? So for me, burlesque is that lost art of the tease. So it is sexual, but it's not, to me, it never really was, which I know probably sounds funny as a male, but like, yes, I could look at a woman's photo that she sends in those, outrageous, the gowns and all of that stuff and go, that's gorgeous and it's sexy. But it's not sexual, right? So I would say burlesque is kind of capturing the woman's view of herself, which is sexy, right? And not a man saying, perform for us, right? And I didn't realize even what we had done the first 2 shows. And the day I started selling my own tickets, because I wasn't sure where all the money was going, was a revelation, because it was all women buying the tickets, and they were dragging their boyfriends or their girlfriends to the show. And I didn't even pay attention to who was walking in the door. It just got so crazy so fast. But then when I saw those names, I was like, wow, what is this about? And then we were not just a show, right? We were a weekend event. And so we had classes, and the classes sold out instantly. And so that really kind of let me know that there was an interest, right? Women wanted to know, how do I create a character? How do I find this part of myself? How do I, who never thought of myself, some of them maybe, but most of them never thought of themselves as sexy or sexual. Or no, they probably thought of themselves sexual, but they probably never thought of themselves as sexy. And how do I create this character for myself? How do I dress like that? How do I do makeup? Same thing we did with tiki and lounge and swing dancing was like, how do I tie a tie? I grew up with grunge and Led Zeppelin and torn t-shirts and the Ramones, right? That was my band. And so, I think we tapped into a kind of a longing to what would now be cosplay almost, right? Like to put on the fantasy of that kind of a world, right? And not feel that you were a victim or you were being, that there were predators out there, right? And we had the same thing with Bardo Go-Go. We're playing 60s French music. And unlike American rock and roll, most of the French music was, or at least the best part of it, was females. And so they were called Yeah girls. And they did a lot of covers. You could find like These Boots Are Made for Walking, sung in French. But they also had a lot of originals, and just their voices were flirty and fun. And there's a romanticness there that you didn't find in 60s rock, which was still very dark and male-centered. But they could frequently take the beats, right, from rock music, which, that masculine energy. And so you had this thing. And so women would come, and still, I just finished doing the last one like 2 years ago. But we still do it once a year on Bastille Day. But yeah, women immediately flocked. Our audience was mostly women, and all dressed up and all wearing 60s fashions and doing their hairdos. And now we have a group come in and they do 60s hairstyles, and we have makeup people all for free, just because we realize like it's once a year. So let's just have fun. If we don't make any money, who cares? We have jobs now. So, and it's fun, and it's a safe energy. Maybe it'll spread.
Other people I've interviewed have said that, you can take dance and do theater all through school, and then you grow up, and where is the opportunity for adult play? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that's the element that is intriguing to you.
Yes, that, and I was friends with Dirk Dirksen, who ran the Mabuhay Gardens, which was the punk rock club in San Francisco. I wasn't there at the start of it in 76, 77, 78, but I moved there in the early 80s. And then I made friends with him. I had him on my radio show on Calex, and he just brought a bunch of old records. And I just remember like talking with him as we would play the songs. We would be off mic, and he said, everyone says I'm a punk rock promoter, but he was much older than the scene and the performers. And he goes, but I never thought of myself that way. I just thought that anybody who wants a stage should have one. He goes, and what people don't remember about the scene is, yes, you would see the Avengers and the Dead Kennedys, but then you would see some guy just reading weird poems or juggling or, whatever, like an old Ed Sullivan show, but weird. And I said, that was kind of my vision for Tease-O-Rama. And at the very start, we had Baggy Pants Comics, and we had some odd things. And then the guys, what they called Burlesque, they started to appear. And that was hilarious because they would have a real outrageous sense of humor. And we had one at the start for the first few years. We only had one like straight up heterosexual guy. Rocky Roulette, who did the pogo stick act. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Oh my God, it's hysterical. And he was great because he would just be blasted out of his mind, and he would bouncing on this pogo stick in like some cowboy outfit, like with 70s aviator shades on. And he would strip while pogo sticking, but he always looked like, and he might have in his regular life plunged into the crowd. I never heard, I didn't keep track in between shows with everybody's stories, but he never did with us, but it always looked like he was about to hurl into the crowd and kill somebody. So there's this element of danger, and there were some really fun acts, like as it developed, women started to get that this was a political statement. And that was super exciting. And I think if we ever got back together, or if we had kept going, it would have mutated into something more than traditional striptease by a long shot. I think Doe would have also gotten bored. I think she was starting to get bored with it too. We just both happened to be the same age, and we had kids, and it was just, we have lives now, and this is taking a lot of time and energy, and it's its own thing. But it was super nourishing and rewarding, and there was a definite community that was built. We always said if we ever did a documentary, it would be called Tease-O-Rama Changed My Life, because that was the number one statement we got from people. They would come up to us and go, Tease-O-Rama changed my life. Like, it just plugged them in. They were outsiders, right? And I think that's our mentality. So.
And is that what you mean by it's a political act, creating community and giving a space for the weirdos? Right,
exactly, yeah. And, now outsider music has a name, outsider music, and outsider art has a name, outsider art. But, when I was on Cali, we would play these things, and people would think, like Wesley Willis, right, who was, I don't remember what he had wrong with him, but he was severely mentally handicapped. And his songs are in, what's the one with the McDonald's one where he eats and eats? Morgan Spurlock, he came here. Anyway, so some of his songs have been in movies and stuff. And it was always this thing where, like, is this shock jock stuff? Are you just playing this because and it was like, no, it's not at all. It's like, it's fascinating to me because it's real, and we live in such an inauthentic world, and this desire to have an actual human being with a vision was amazing. So I watch those kind of movies. I listen to that kind of music, and yeah, a slick Hollywood production is interesting, but not really, right? Like, when we went out to, they flew me out to Vegas to see, what's the Cirque du Soleil show called? God, I'm sorry, I'm old. Zumanity. And at the time, it was the only Cirque show, and I don't know, it's been 15 years at least, that was not in the 97th or 8th percentile of seats, butts and seats. And so my quick take on it was, it's not outrageous and sexual enough to be a Vegas thing, and it's too sexy to be a typical Cirque du Soleil family show. So they had a tough space that they were trying to fill. And I went out and I expected the show to be kind of too packaged, to be a little too slick, and I was pleasantly surprised. Their MC was a drag queen, and some of the performers were, of course, just over the top, and the things they were doing, spheres coming down filled with water, and like all of that was very Cirque du Soleil, but they really kept the humanity in the show. And I was like, wow, we have a lot more in common than I would have thought. My final dream before the economy collapsed in 2008 and we stopped I was pitching them. I said, well, how about this? So they started putting performers in our show, and I think they gave us 10 or 15 grand, but it cost that to get them. They're two people to come out. But my final pitch was like, all of our money goes to promotion, and we pay every single performer. Nobody, I can't say nobody, but a lot of the women would complain that other people don't pay them, or, they say they're going to pay them and then they don't, or they just flat out say, you can be in this for free. And we're like, no, you're up here and you're only doing one act for 3 minutes. We gave everybody $50. And And then some of the bands and stuff, I think we got up to $200 or $300. I don't remember what we did for Dita or Catherine. I'm sure we had a separate. I know I have the checkbook somewhere so I can figure it out. But they were both long-time professionals with a lot of expenses and a lot of props and costumes and things. But even then, they were doing it as a favor to us. I forgot when I started.
We had talked a little about adult play, and you mentioned the inauthentic world of the 1980s sort of corporate. And
Cirque.
You were talking about swing and...
No, I remember now. So my final dream was I pitched them. I said, well, how about this? Instead of us doing our show and then you saying, well, no, we're not interested in that market, or, how about you just tell us, we're trying to break into these 8 markets, because they really valued us. They were like, well, you have something here. We don't know how you're reaching these people. And I'm like, we're reaching these people because we're making them feel included. It was pretty obvious from my viewpoint. But they couldn't really figure out how to do that, how to grab those people. And I said, well, you're inherently restricted by being the biggest entertainment live conglomerate in the world, right? So outsiders are not going to be attracted to you. And you're also inherently restricted by being afraid of being a little dangerous, right? And so you got all the lawyers and you got all the families and you got all the people that are going to come after you because you have deep pockets. And so that's going to change the makeup of it. But I was really impressed with Zumanity, and I really liked the people I was working with over there. And I said, how about you just tell us where you want to go? And then you do all the promotions, because you already have this whole machine. That's what we don't have. And we'll just go to those places. And then slowly over time, we'll build up ourselves. But you could even be like, you could part owner, or you could own it, or it could just be like a farm team for you. Like I always had these vague ideas, and I would just kind of go until they came together. And then one day the economy just started to collapse. And of course we know Vegas got hit first and fastest, and San Francisco also. And I called up and everybody I knew was laid off and gone, and everything had changed. So then I just called Doe and I said, I don't really want to do it next year. Let's just take a break, which has been 15 years now. So, yeah, but both of our kids are all graduated and out of school, and who knows?
So just backing up with some origin story. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school, college?
Okay, I have to. I'm not hiding anything. It's a long, weird origin story, so I'll just edit it down. But I grew up in Connecticut, and I grew up with a highly romantic sensibility of the world. So that's where the cosplay and the dress up and all that comes in. And I read comic books, and I read watched science fiction movies and pulp magazines, and I sort of had this image of a highly stylized, romanticized view of the world. Also a highly dated male white privilege world in some ways, right? It really was like that kind of British Raja view of what other countries were like. And so I took off. I went to the South Seas when I was 18, pre-internet. I traveled around all these islands. I saw an ad in the paper for Air New Zealand South Pacific Super Pass, and it was $999, and there was 18 flights and places I still couldn't find, Tonga and the Cook Islands. And so I bummed around there, and I came back, and then my high school girlfriend was a junior by that point. And so she got into a junior abroad program. And I said, well, how about if I come over and I'll write all your papers for you and we'll just travel? Because I can whip through school. It's just a game. I tell my students how to do it too. I'm like, this is how you game school if you're interested. But I didn't learn anything. I just know how to take tests. So we did that. And so I traveled all over Europe for a while. And then I moved out to San Francisco, and then we split up. And then my next girlfriend I met shortly afterwards, who's now my wife, decades later. And we've been together all this time. And we both, her family was disintegrating, and I was telling her I had this dream of like Phileas Fogg of going around the world without any airplanes, or like this kind of romantic version of traveling. And she, because so much, she had traveled. She had been to Japan when she was 16 as an exchange student, and she had worked in a fishery the previous summer in Alaska. So she was pretty adventurous, and she's like, sure, let's do it, because her family was all falling apart. And so we ended up going for 2 years around the world. We got caught in the Gulf War, so we had to fly out of Africa into India. And then we flew again out of Nepal into Malaysia, because there was all these blizzards and China had blocked. We were going to go overland. And anyway, it was crazy. We crossed the ocean on a cargo ship, and so we did. We rode camels in the Sahara Desert. We worked the grape harvest in France, and then somewhere along the way, our stories evolved and switched, and I went from like trying to make the world be this romantic view that I had, and learning to just let go. We got stuck because of the Gulf War. We got stuck in Suez for weeks, and we couldn't get out. And I was like, and I could do almost anything. I'm very linearly focused. And I was coming up with these elaborate routes through just really like through jungles and civil wars in Sudan. And I remember going to the Somalian embassy before the country completely collapsed and telling him why he had to give us a visa. And he just looked at me and he goes, someday I hope you will visit Somalia. But it's not today. And then right after was that whole Black Hawk Down and all the horrible stuff. We would have been right there. Anyway, so we came back and we got our book. We wrote a book. We went and lived in Vermont on a ski mountain in the summer. And then we got to like the vice president of 2 different publishing houses right as publishing was starting to transition. And they said, this is great. Take out all the philosophy and we'll make a funny how-to book for college kids. And I was like, well, it's only funny, so they'll read the philosophy. If you've traveled, you'll know. And it was a new thing. We treated ourselves as characters. And so it's what's called literary travel nonfiction. But he goes, well, there's no place for your Walden books. I'm like, oh, that's good. We just did something original. And he goes, no, it's bad, because we slot one of these. So everything was just becoming corporate at that point. So I was like, well, later, it's just another thing where I just did something and just could have made money and didn't. So 6 months later, A Year in Provence comes out, and now you can't find a travel book that's not what we did. So we just recently dug it out, and we're like, let's look at this. Like, we went to the Thorn Tree Cafe in Africa where Hemingway went, and we left a note tacked to the tree for our friends who would find it 3 weeks later. Like, that world is gone, right? And you can't get lost anywhere. We got lost all over the place. And we got mail sent to the American Express office from months earlier, because it would go to my mom, and then she would send 2 packages a year, and one was Christmas. And we're reading about the San Francisco earthquake of '89 all at the same time. Like, all of our friends' personalities came out, like my high school girlfriend was like, it's icky and scary. And then my engineer friend was like, it's 3.689 and 12 kilometers from Santa Cruz. And then my literary friend was like, plumes of purple smoke. Anyway, so yeah. And then we came back, and we returned to San Francisco, and I ran after school program for the YMCA in a highly impacted neighborhood of the Mission, which it's hard to imagine now, but in the 80s it was. First day on the job, I'm taking, these are kids K through 5th grade in an elementary school. And I go, let's go for a hike. And the kids are like, whoa, what are you doing? And I'm like, what? Like, you have a red sweatshirt on. You can't go down that way. You got to go that way. That's a blue sweatshirt. All those projects are gone and the gangs are gone. But yeah, we'd shootouts and, covering the kids up on the floor of the muni buses. And, it was wild. And then then we got married in 97, and my wife's like, well, let's talk about kids. Not like we had never talked before, but like, let's talk about it as if it's going to happen. And I said, one more. Let's get in a car and just go and see how far. Let's see if we can get to the end of the earth. I heard there's a sign down there in the middle of a park in Argentina or Chile or something. And she's like, and then we can do that. And she's like, okay. So this is why we're still together. But now I have to be the one who says, okay, because, middle-aged women. And so she's got her view now. It's my time to go. Okay. So that's where we're at, and it's good. And we, but that was awesome. And so she ended up coming back halfway because friends we had met, we had a big tragedy with some friends, and she was upset, and she came home, and I was like, I gotta finish, and it's just how I am. And she's like, okay, try to keep it under 3 or 4 months, and I kept going, and I found that sign. And the funny thing is, I tell this story in my classroom a lot. Every semester, I probably tell it once. And I've had 2 students now who've gone off and found the sign, but it's a fancy sign now. It's not just a little board, but it's still there. It says, Aquí termina Ruta 3, Alaska, 15,000 kilometers north. And it is literally the end of the road. It's kind of cool. And I have, last part of this story, I went to the post office, and I had my passport, and I had a postcard, and I had her stamp this postcard. It's the last post office, the end of the world. And then I tried to get her to stamp my passport, and she was horrified, and she was like freaking out, and I couldn't figure this out. And I'm like, come on, it's my passport. What do you care? And then I realized, well, it's Chile, and Allende had just died, and all the disappeared people that were down there, that's those kind of lessons you learn when you're traveling, like get out of your bubble. Like, oh my gosh, this is life and death for her. Don't mess with some legal thing that she had no idea. If she stamped the wrong thing in a passport in Chile, she could be disappeared. So anyway, that story about what will you do if there's a fire. When we had the fire up here last year, I grabbed the postmark from the end of the world, and that was it. That's all I need to validate my life. And my piece of the Berlin Wall, because we were there when that came down. So that's it. And then I started, when she did that, I started just on a lark. We had a young baby, and I just started putting on events just for fun. And they grew and they grew. And that first Tease-O-Rama with Brian was in this dive bar, the Cocodrie. And I'm sure that we'll get to that in a minute. But one of my favorite places on earth, just horrible. One little toilet at the top of the stairs on a little landing with no seat and no door. I mean, it was punk. And you would walk in, and my friend Scott was also from our punk station. He was the booker, and he was like lurking in the basement. He would be booking just like insane stuff, Jim Rose Circus Sideshow, and people hanging from hooks by their testicles. And it was like, these are my people. This is the end of the world. And Scott was this little, just nerdy. And if you ever watch this guy, I say this with affection, I've told you this too. And I just said, Scott, well, am I going to find Boy Scouts buried under here one day? Why are you look so just generically milquetoast, and yet he was so extreme. Swedish death metal was his favorite, So anyway, that's where the show was born, and it was mobbed. That first show sold out around the block. We were raided 3 times because it was in North Beach, and we realized all the mafia guys who ran the strip clubs were probably just calling the cops, and but everybody had pasties on, and they probably could have cited us for fire. People were hanging. There's 2 big poles in the club, and people were hanging from these big masonite poles, like Woodstock, right? Like hanging from the from the sound structure. It was insane. That was one of the best nights of my life. It was awesome.
This was 1997.
97, yeah.
And so how did that all start? Who had the idea? What did you do? How did that happen?
So I think I started that story, but I don't ever always finish them. But yeah, so there was this moment where people were just coming up to me. So Bardo Ogogo started because Johnny Pink Frankenstein from Calex again came up, and I had given him, there's a French district in San Francisco, and they were having a Bastille party, and I knew Johnny was playing this French music. That was his thing. And and I wasn't super into it yet. I hadn't really listened to much, and he was kind of new there. But I saw this thing, and I have that kind of brain that connects everybody with everything. And so I saw this little thing, French Bastille Day party. So I cut it out and I gave it to him. I said, hey, it's a French party for Bastille Day. And then I didn't see him again for, 2 months, because we didn't really hang around at the time, although we ended up being like living next door to each other and stuff. But I saw him a little later and I said, oh, did you ever go to that party? He goes, yeah, it sucked. And it's like Edith Piaf and all this crap. And then I was like, oh, did anybody go? He goes, I don't know, like 2,000 people. And I was like, wait, 2,000 people went to a Bastille party. And I said, do you think you could do better? And he goes, yeah, I could do better. So I booked the date, and then I, besides O-Rama, I love a go-go. I think I just gave you some flyers. I have a whole bunch with the word a go-go. It's like my favorite thing. And I collect albums with the word a go-go on them. And so Bardot a go-go popped into my head, because who doesn't look at Bridget Bardot and go, oh my God, that's the most incredible looking person I've ever seen of any gender. And and then I just started doing what I do. I started like digging up my favorite thing is early 60s anything, and the clothes. And then Johnny brought in Dan Strakota, Brother Grimm, who I didn't really know at the time, but he ended up becoming the music editor for the San Francisco Weekly, where I threw those big parties. And then he owns the club where part owner of the club that we do Bardot Go-Go at. So that's how that happened. And then another one of these, and probably the same couple of month period, Brian showed up and he told me about this burlesque show with the Velvet Hammer, and he said it was really fun. And so I just I came up with Tease-O-Rama, and then I started making the posters and painting the art, and I wrote the press release. I always wrote the press release before we had anything. And then I would get people to like, I just announced this tiki show with Johnny Coconut and the Pineapples. Like, can you be Johnny Coconut? And so the tickets would be like sold, and I wouldn't even I would just make up people. But it was always fun because it had that kind of punk energy, So that's where the first one came from. And then what you would think of as Tease-O-Rama. So there was just another show, and I went on and I think I did 280 something different ones of these. And then probably a year or two later, I think 99. So I went on that trip down to the end of the world, and then I came back, and then Doe called me up, and we were good friends because of the tiki stuff. And her husband Otto was the one who really first told me how to put on a show. Like, you got to have a back line, and you got to call the promoter, and you got to do this, and they're going to ask for a bar guarantee. And, it all seems so basic now, but like Otto would talk to me for like 2 hours at a time. He was awesome. And we're still friends. And I met Otto because he put out a zine, which was big in the 90s, called Tiki News. And not to be confused with Tiki Magazine, which kind of copied Otto later in color. But it was just a little folded up at Kinko's, and it would be in record stores. And I don't even think he did 500 copies of it. But it was a revelation. Like, the whole point of a zine was to be what would be a Facebook chat group or something today. It was like, other people like what you like, right? And like, we were all of a certain age that our primal adventure imagery was going to Disney World. And for me, it was Florida. For him, it was LA. And going in the tiki room and going, wow, this is exotic. These things are singing, and the drums are pounding, and lightning and flashing and thunder. And so he had a little address in there, and I wrote to him, and he wrote back with a phone number, and I called him up, and he's like, I said, oh, you want to come on my radio show? And he goes, well, as it turns out, I've met this girl, just Doe, and I'm moving to San Francisco. And so he moved up, and he would come on I have a whole bunch of radio shows we did together, Otto's Forbidden Island, and we would, because of Tiki News, he got all the cool stuff. And CDs were just brand new, and so old records were getting turned into CDs, and they would promote them by giving them out to influencers, but it wasn't called that at the time. And Otto was definitely an influencer, and he would get all this cool stuff, and then he would come on and play all these things. And then Shag was a friend of his, and he was doing the covers for a lot of the Dionysus stuff, and then he ended up being the artist for Tease-O-Rama. But our connection was all through tiki stuff. And I'm super into vintage Jan and Dean. That was the first concert I ever went to. It was at 13 years old and I was going to Jan and Dean and Shana Na. And so I ended up becoming friends with Gidget, who's still around. On Sunday nights, she's 83 now, I think, 82. And she hosts at Duke Kahanamoku's down in Southern California. So I got to introduce Shag to Gidget, and they were both so happy to meet each other. So that was cool.
And so focusing on Tease-O-Rama,
Yeah.
how did that develop?
So what did I just say? Let me see. Where did I leave off? So 99. Yes, right. I got distracted from that story. So I get a call from Doe, who, as I've established now, I'm friends with Otto. And so I'm friends with Doe through Otto. And then Doe started the Devilettes right around that time. So I would stick the Devilettes in anything I could. That, to me.
And who were they? What was that?
So the Devilettes is Doe's dance troupe. They're a synchronized dance troupe straight out of like a Busby Berkeley, the women swimming and synchronized. And just the cutest thing ever because they're all not what would be traditional dancers. They're just whoever was interested, all shapes, all sizes, all colors, just so San Francisco. And, what would be, and I say this with affection, though, nerd girls, like, band camp girls or theater girls or whatever, right? But they had this, and it was sexy enough to be part of Tease-O-Rama. We always put them in there, but it was, there was just a wholesome old hullabaloo. Like they had the white dresses with the fringe on them and they had the red ones with little light up devil horns, right? And they would do these really cute synchronized dance routines. And I think they have a documentary somewhere out there on them. And Doe would choreograph it all. And then she would call up all of her DJ friends, of which I was one, and like, what do you got? And we would give her like some weird, cool song and she would take snippets of it and edit together into a routine. And so she called up and she said, hey, I met this woman online, which was 99, so it was still a new thing. And it was in a chat. And we started talking about, like, because she had come to the Tease-O-Rama with Brian. And she was also friends with Brian. I might have even probably met Brian through Otto. And she said, yeah, we're going to go to New Orleans and have like a get-together of burlesque people. Do you want to come be in? And I had just had a baby. So that was my first son. I have two, and that was a year before she had a baby. So I say I can't do anything now. I foolishly procreated for the next 20 years. I'm not going to get to go do anything. But that wasn't true. I dragged my kids to everything. We had fun. So I didn't go to that. And then she came back and she said, then she called up from New Orleans. She said, can we steal your name, Tease-O-Rama? She goes, it's a really good name. And I'm like, sure. I didn't ever do anything twice. And then she came back and she said, oh my God, it was so much fun. And there was like, she goes, we ended up finding like 50 performers. So, keep in mind, burlesque was dead, right, for at least 25 years. And Dita had just started out and she was starting to make a name for herself.
Dita Von Teese.
Yeah, sorry, Dita Von Teese, yep. And other than that, there wasn't a ton between the 70s and her, except for the woman who trained her and taught her everything, which was Catherine Delish. But I didn't know Catherine at the time. She ended up being in every single thing we did, and we became friends. And she's an extraordinary performer, but, I don't know. There's other people who could tell you better the real lineage of burlesque, probably yourself as well. But to me, Catherine was the link between the old world and this kind of punk rock version of burlesque. Like she kept it going. So she came back and said it was really fun. And I said, well, she goes, we're thinking of doing it next year. And I said, well, why don't you just do it here? Then we don't have to travel anywhere. And her and Allison were, I think Allison and I were both very punk. Allison, much younger than me, but she's from New York, right? So she's got that kind of New York grungy aesthetic. Doe also was still coming out of this kind of tiki grungy kind of a thing. But I was kind of bored with that in the sense that like I was in my 30s and I kind of wanted to, I was aspiring to like want to be around cool. I want to be one of those people who flies places, like to like consult or whatever. Like I just like I don't want to sell out. I don't like stuff, but I just kind of wanted like a different kind of romantic life. And I was like, well, let's just go upscale. And I had just because of Bardo a Go-Go. It's good I told these stories early. I had gotten a call one day from some guy going, hey, I saw these flyers. Bardo a Go-Go. I love Bridget Bardo. These are really cool. When's your next show? I want to come up. I'm in LA. And by the way, I'm Nancy Sinatra's manager. And I'm like, because I was a little obsessed by Nancy Sinatra too. And so I ended up working with Nancy for a couple of years. And he wasn't actually her manager, but he was her publicist. But he hooked me up with her, and I ended up doing a bunch of shows with her. And I was working with the Ventures at the time because, like I say, I love anything surf, especially from the 60s. And then it turns out one day I'm talking to the two publicists on the same day, and Nancy turns out likes the Ventures, and the Ventures like Nancy. So I hooked them up, and they recorded a song together, Kicks by Paul Revere and the Raiders, who I immediately then called up Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders because that's how it worked. And I'm like, what can I do with you now? Anyway, his wife, like, wait, Mark's song? And I was like, yeah. So that was kind of how it started to evolve. So I said, well, let's go to Bimbo's 365 Club. I just did Nancy Sinatra there, so I know the owner. And honestly, I've never loved a place to this day as much as I love Bimbo's.
Why is that? What did it have?
It's pretty much untouched. It's almost 80 years old now. It used to be on 365 Market Street, which is why it's called Bimbo's 365 Club, not because it's open every day of the year. And Michael is the grandson of, so Bimbo's an Italian name. It's not a pejorative term for women. His grandfather, his name was very hard to pronounce, so Bimbo was an Italian nickname, and so people would call him Bimbo because they couldn't say his actual name. And I believe I just looked him up recently. I haven't seen Michael in about 10 years, but I just looked him up because I might go down next month. And I think his dad's still alive. His dad's got to be in his 90s by now. So I just called Michael. And I said, I'm doing this thing, and I don't know why Michael had like Robin Williams calling him up and going, I need to test, some new material. And Nora Jones's first performance, like everybody who wanted to do something super classy would go to Bimbo's, and Michael never had to really worry about anything. And the cover band thing hadn't quite exploded yet, but it was starting to. And that was just bread and butter for him. He could pack that club with, people who drink and spend a lot of money and just want to pick each other up and listen to Neil Diamond cover tunes. And the big one is Tainted Love right now. They do 80s stuff. So Michael just said, okay. And he drew up a contract, and I believe there was a bar guarantee and a ticket guarantee and some other stuff. And I don't know what I would have done if we had tanked. I didn't have a penny until about 3 years ago. It was the first time in my life. I had $1 left at the end of a paycheck. And, but I just signed everything, and I'm like, yeah, we'll figure it out. It always worked out. Like whenever I did anything, it just always kind of happened okay. And there was never anything left for me, but I paid everybody. I never welched on anybody. And so we did it at Bimbo's, and it was incredible. First of all, that marquee, that vintage style marquee that only said Tease-O-Rama on it. And then in red, big plastic red letters, sold out, like 3 days. And then when Friday night came, it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. No, even earlier. When did we open? 7. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 hours before the show. People were sitting outside in lawn chairs. And Michael came to me at the end of the weekend. He goes, this is your ticket, right? And I'm like, I've thrown a lot of tickets in the garbage, Michael. But no, I don't know. I thought maybe I would do something, but I don't know. It's always another butterfly flying by. But it was fun. It was a really fun ride for about 5 years. And a lot of, one of my jokes was, this is like an episode of The Love Boat. All of these second tier celebrities that would come in, and I don't want to say any of their names because I don't want them to think that they're second tier. But for me, they were exciting. I'll say two, because two people that I just was like really excited to see. Q from Star Trek, because I was a big Next Generation fan, and Malcolm in the Middle, Frankie Muniz, and he was underage at the time, and I was like, dude, you gotta like go get a wristband, and it's gonna cost us money. We gotta like keep an eye on it. But I guess he knew somebody in the show, So, but people like that would come, and so I knew we were onto something. Because people were sitting in lawn chairs for 6 hours. And part of that was because unlike Los Angeles, where everything was like, how can we make maximum profit? We wouldn't block anything off. I wouldn't do that. I ended up in the end, there's two side rails of tables that are slightly risen with a little railing, little 4-seaters. I think maybe 5 or 6 of them on either side. And I ended up blocking those off for the performers, the legends, because everybody else, even the performers, they could stay, but they couldn't block off seats for their boyfriends, because people were waiting for hours. People were excited to go. And I thought, and I still believe, like, if you really want to go to a show and you're willing to sleep out, you should get to be in the front row. And I hate now that you go to, if you're like a huge fan of some band, and the first 10 rows are all people in the industry who are so jaded and bored, and whereas you would just be so excited to be in the front row of the Who. Oh my God. So.
How long did Tease-O-Rama run? Years, I mean, through the years.
So if we forget 1997, and we just go with the Doe, Allison. So Doe brought in Allison. Allison had contacted Doe on that chat. I think that's how they met. So that was 99. And I think the last one was 2006 or 2008. So maybe 7 years. And each time it would be like, well, what's next? Right. So we did bimbos, and that was huge. And then we were like, okay, well, let's do these classes. And then somehow I don't remember how I got Cirque du Soleil. Maybe Allison or Doe. No, and it wasn't Allison. I don't know if they contacted us or if I contacted them, but somehow we ended up with this woman who just had a baby, and she just texted me yesterday, and we haven't seen much of each other, but she still promotes for Doe's Tiki Oasis event, Christy Crow and Flag Marketing. And so it might have been through Christy, because she got involved because she just came to the show and she was like, this is amazing. What can I do? How can I get involved? So we hired her. That was the only real semi-professional person of any sort that we hired. And she was a professional, and she was at the start in the 90s of internet marketing, and that was her thing. And so she would hook up all kinds of stuff for us. And she was the one, and she's still like, she's so funny when she sees me. She still like is appalled at how much I am embarrassed by money, or want nothing to do with money. And she's like, Alan, you don't understand. Like, this is gold for people. And she would be like, because we would go up and down North Beach just trying to get local businesses to take out a little ad so we could put out a program that didn't cost us, they were like $2,000 to put those programs out. And then she started selling ads. And I think if we had kept going, we would have got real sponsors. I turned, this is me again, but I turned down a ton, and Doe agreed with this too, of cigarette money. My dad had died of cancer from smoking, and my mother-in-law had emphysema and crashed her car while coughing and died, So it was like, there was so much cigarette money in the 90s, and I never took any of it. But I think there was one show I did through somebody else because I wanted to work with the guy from the Kinks. I'm like, I'll turn an eye this one time. Yeah.
And so in 2008, Tease-O-Rama went on a tour and went to Seattle, then Portland, then Ashland.
So that's 2008.
2008.
So 9 years we made it.
Yeah.
That's a good run.
Yeah. How did that tour come around? And talk to me about Ashland and Portland specifically.
So that was, again, what's next? And so for me, like, I would come up with these alliterations and stuff. And I was like, how about the Big Book of Burlesque? And we'll like, did we do this online, or was this just you and I talking about the We did it already. Okay.
Yeah.
There's kind of come up with how can we make money without exploiting the women who are our friends, right? Because at this point, it's a movement, and we're all part of something, and we're seeing each other socially. And I've never been big on being online, but Doe and Allison were online, and they're going all over and seeing these people in all different places. And I traveled a lot. Also, so I'd go to New York, and I would my friend worked at Xanadu, and she would take me into the play, and then I would go see the Pontani sisters, and they would take me, and then someone else would take me to a restaurant. It was super fun. It was like that life I wanted without having to like have the material obligations of being rich, but I got to do all of that stuff. And so it was fun, and we didn't want to exploit them. And so, we were trying to do that. And then we had the pink pages, which was like, well, how about if we just make pre-internet, right? 99 was still pretty new. How do we make we'll put a pink pages, like a yellow pages, and everyone can pay $10 and we'll update it every year with their contact information. And, our goal was for them to be able to go off and do stuff. And so I remember coming up with see the show this year, be the show next year. And, and all of this was possible because Doe is like a gift to somebody. I knew she was my ticket to the big time, and I just never figured it out. She's the most organized person ever. She could keep track of everything, and she was super computer savvy, and she worked for office manager for some really hip San Francisco firm. So she was so dialed on all this kind of stuff. And Allison, for the bit she was there, came from New York, so she would bring in, to me, I grew up outside of there. I love the New York performers. They have this in-your-faceness about them. So Allison would bring in these really cool New York things that were super fun. And Allison was part of the zine movement, and so more on the kind of publicity side of things. After she left, it was really fun for me because I like, as I said with the other shows, doing the press releases and writing. So a lot of the stuff in those books, the really weird stuff, is just, that was my favorite thing, was writing those up. But Doe would organize that book, and she would be up until like 4:00 in the morning, and she had kids, and then she would go to her job, and then she would have this thing printed up, and it was amazing. And so my job was always to kind of work the deals and go meet people and I guess schmooze, right? I didn't realize that was a skill set. I now understand that that's what every CEO and all those people who do mergers, it's like they all have that one skill set, but they drink and they play golf, and I don't do either of those.
Who bought the big book of burlesque? Who bought that?
I can't recall if we ever actually did it. I don't know that it's a real thing that existed, but we did the pink pages. Those are in the program guide. And I don't know if I think we started it, and then it got overwhelming because it was all on Doe's plate again, and she was still doing Tiki Oasis and her job and her kids.
So the tour in 2008 to Seattle, Portland, and Ashland, did you tour with them?
Yeah. So that was like, okay, this is a lot of work. We need to go to more places, because like at the end of the night, I think we had $2,000 or something. We split it 3 ways, or when it was just her and I. So $1,000 seemed like a lot because I had never had a real job. I just always managed to get paid to do whatever I wanted to, but it was just enough, hand to mouth. And so I was like, well, maybe we have to do more of these, right? And then Christy from Flag Marketing was like, yeah, then I could sell more ads, because now, they want to see bodies and eyeballs on the page, or she used some good advertising jargon. I was like, okay, let's do it. So, so because I had moved to Ashland at this point, I was like, well, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco makes sense. Those are all one-day things. And then we really wanted Los Angeles, because that was where something was going to happen. Somebody was going to see us, and it was going to explode. And plus we could get Dita down there. She wouldn't have to travel. I don't remember. I don't think she did I think she only did Los Angeles. that year. So that was that. And so, I had to, I had just bought a house, and it was right at the start of Ashland getting discovered. So my house, Steve Smith, I hope he doesn't mind me using his name, from Journey, bought the house next door to me, and my house immediately doubled in value. So, and then we became friends, and I actually got to go on the Journey airplane, and he jammed with my son in the jazz festival. And so anyway, it was really fun. But anyway, so just by buying the house, my house went up 300,000 or whatever. So I had a credit line now of 250,000. So suddenly I could back the tour. And so I could get the vans and pay the venues and, put the whatever we had to put up front. And there were some people like Dirty Martini and stuff from New York. They'd been doing it for a while at this point, and they would have done anything for us, but it was a full-time occupation for them to just scrape enough money together and then spend it on their costumes and then spend it on plane tickets. So we always tried to fly out the ones that we could fly out. And that was expensive. But it was fun. And so that was kind of how we did that. And then it just became obvious that I don't know, I live in Ashland. It was still pretty new here, but I think this would be pretty funny. Because I had seen the Armory, and I had bumped into this guy, Jason Gallagher, who still books the Armory. And he was another one of these people. He's an Ashland person. And he ran a place called Off the Grid Waffles in that A Street building that is now a toy place that was Plexus for a long time. And there was a bunch of shops in there. And I was sitting there, and I looked around and I go, this would be a cool place to put on a show. And the guy serving the waffles damn right it would. And then it turns out he was also a promoter, and he's another one of these just dreamers, and he's always just doing stuff, really cool stuff, but he's a little more like a Burning Man kind of a jam band kind of person. But still, he made it happen. He's like, I can book the Armory. And so he went in with us on it, and I had done one show here, and I lost $3,000 or something. The only time in my life I lost money. I had moved here, and I had the Pontani sisters and Low Straight Jackets, and they had just come off Conan O'Brien the night before. They had sold out everything on this whole tour. Everywhere they went, everyone loves them. And Low Straight Jackets were, of course, for us surf fans, the 80s surf band. And 10 people showed up to my Ashland show. And that's when I realized nobody in Ashland does anything because they know it or it's cool or through any traditional means of going to things. They go because everybody else in Ashland is going. So when we did the show in Ashland, the Tease-O-Rama show, I booked the Armory, which, what is that, 500 people or something like that. And we decided to table it because that made much more sense than having people my age standing up. And I just gave away a spot at each table because by then I think we were like $50 tickets, or I don't know if we were, I think we were 100 for the weekend in San Francisco and 50 for the one-nighters or something. And so I just knew I had a lot of friends. My kids were in Montessori, so I met some really interesting people that had big social groups. And I just said, I'll give you a table. Nobody knew Tease-O-Rama. But they didn't even know burlesque. Like, it wasn't even a thing. I remember hearing people going like, I don't even know what I'm here for, but it looks fun, right? Because we're so remote. And what was awesome, which is still true 20 years into my stay here, we're the best audience in the world, like for performers, right? Like because of OSF, because we're so appreciative of anybody coming out here, and because we have the facilities to get real performances, like not like a normal small town. People are just, they applaud, and they're, you've been to OSF, like we standing ovation for our high school plays, right? Everything. And they're awesome. I just watched Hair that we put on at the high school 4 years ago. Last night we watched the video, and it was extraordinary, right? So all the performers say Ashland was my favorite performance I've ever done. People were just howling and screaming and standing up and cheering for every single thing. I talked to Susan who ran the Black Sheep, and she did the silks, and we put silks up so that they could spin down into the middle of the crowd at some point. And I tried to bring in lots of local people. Hamfist, I just were friends from my cousin. And I was like, we need something while people are coming in. And so I said, just do your dirty country songs. So they did a lot of, those kind of what they call grease your griddle songs. So that was fun. So that's kind of how we ended up with those dates. And I think the next plan was to plug in Vegas. But at that point, Luke and Laura had taken Dixie Evans's Burlesque Hall of Fame, which was really like a trailer in Palm Springs. But she had a very well-established show. That's what kept Burlesque alive for, all those years. And people would go out to the desert for this show. And then they moved it to Vegas, and it got bigger and bigger, Burlesque Hall of Fame. So it was difficult. We couldn't really go to Vegas, or we would have had to figure something out to somehow combine it with them or do it 6 months after their event. But we would have figured something out,
So you've already kind of touched on this. What kind of cultural impact do you think burlesque has had?
I think it's huge. Like, as I said, people come up to us all the time and say, Tease-O-Rama changed my life. I think we gave a community to a large group of outsiders. I think we touched on a desire for outrageousness that you see all over our culture. But because particularly Doe and I are both very bubblegum, that's our crossover, right? We're the Archies. And because we're bubblegum, it was never seedy. We didn't focus on the fetish imagery. We never marketed like it was 1930s Weimar Berlin. We use shag, right? You've seen his art. And that was kind of that feeling. We wanted it to feel like, everyone's beautiful and it's sexy and people's clothes are coming off. But it was also fun and safe and wholesome, but also politically punk and dangerous. And I remember talking with some people and saying, it's kind of like Colonel Parker saying, if I could find a white guy who could sing like a black guy, there's this would be huge. And I remember saying, if we could liberate women to own their sexuality the way men own their sexuality without the male gaze controlling it at all, it would be great for everybody, right? And I don't think men understand they're their own worst enemies in terms of I'm saying this as a former Catholic, right? The virgin and the whore, right? I want the virgin until she's with me, and then she's the whore, right? And that's an impossible thing to expect of women. And so I think from a cultural sense, to see other women saying, this is how I define myself. And the acts were such a huge range from Harlem Burlesque to Dita, all body shapes, all types, all approaches of music, imagery. I personally I just couldn't wait every year to see the Valva sisters. And I don't even recall if they ever took their clothes. I guess they kind of did. Yeah, of course they did. But not really. Didn't feel like you were watching a striptease act. It was just this hilarious, absurdist humor and really tongue-in-cheek. And there was just a couple of acts. I remember they did Sister Christian this one time. And I must have footage of it somewhere. I would love to see it again. But they did the song Sister Christian, and they're dressed like Catholic schoolgirls, and they're doing this. They're really acrobatic, incredibly acrobatic. We had to install trapezes for them and stuff. And they're doing this wonderful act, and they're spinning each other around, and they're ripping the clothes up. And the whole time there was this big, like a log up against the back of the stage, just leaning there like someone had forgot to clear the stage. And I just remember one of them spinning the other one, and she twirls and she hits the log, and it had some kind of a spring or something, and then that goes whoo, and it turned into a cross, and the whole audience goes ooh, and then their timing was impeccable. She just looks and she goes and then they tied her to the cross, and then she's like doing something, and then Jesus walks by and he's carrying a cross, and he comes across and the whole audience is howling. And then Jesus looks at them and looks at the one tied up with her clothes ripped off, and the other one was whipping her with something. And then he looks at the audience in disgust. He just walks off, and I said, this was one of the greatest moments of theater I've ever seen. And we had another one with a Marie Antoinette woman that sticks in my mind too. It was like, and there was a techno song, Let Them Eat Cake, and she had the hair, and they wheeled the whole cake out. And I just remember it was right at the front of the stage, and she like lifted her leg across it, looked in the audience dead in the eye, and just let it hang, that tension that comedians go for. And then she just did the splits, like cake all over the place. So anyway, yeah, I love that kind of stuff. That's, to me, is what there's a market for that. So my final dream, I don't know if you're going to ask for it, but my final dream was, and this is a big crossover for Doe and I, and probably Allison too, is Quentin Tarantino. I wait for Quentin Tarantino movies to come out every 2 years. And I would have loved to just get in touch with him and see if he would produce a Tease-O-Rama movie with that energy that he has. But I don't know if that would have made it too male. Kitten on the Keys was our MC, and she's our voice. She's incredible. But I did get in touch with Pee Wee Herman, and before he had his Broadway comeback, and because somebody had said he had showed up to Burlesque Hall of Fame, and he was a big fan of burlesque. But at the time, he was trying to make this comeback, and he didn't want to get re-involved with anything related to sex in any way at that time because of his own story. But I think he would have been interesting. I went out and saw Penn and Teller a little while ago, and I talked to Penn, and he had heard of us. And I said, if we ever do this again, I would love you guys to just do whatever that thing is that you always wanted to do. And maybe it doesn't fit with your show anymore. I don't know. But I told him I saw them on their first tour, and I took my mother, and they were in Connecticut. And I don't know why I knew them. They must have been on Letterman or something. And it was the 80s. And I just remember them doing this version of Me and My Shadow. And they were dancing, and they were in gowns, operating gowns. So they made people come up, and they were behind a screen. And they made people come up and look to see that they were completely nude. And you could tell this was Connecticut. These women were embarrassed, And they're like, oh my God. And they do this whole thing. And then they're singing it, and then blood just starts pouring down, not just a little bit, gallons of blood. I don't know. To this day, I don't know how they did it, but I would love to do that. We had a zombie burlesque act once, and I contacted them, and they had just kind of broken up. But I was going to do something here when we had Pride and Prejudice here. I talked to Bill Rausch, the guy who ran Oregon Shakespeare Fest, at the end of the season of doing Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And I was going to combine those people with what I didn't understand was at the end of a season, the actors are done. So I needed to do it at a different time. So, all right, Tease-O-Rama.
So what do you see as the final question here? What do you see as the future of burlesque?
I don't know. As somebody working with high schoolers, alienation is as bad as it's ever been. This Zoom, 2 years of Zoom has broken kids. Anxiety disorders are through the roof. Just everyone says it. It's like we have a bunch of middle schoolers, people can't focus. People are detached. They're lonely. The severe mental illnesses are at an all-time high according to our health department and I work with at-risk kids, so I hear all the stories. So I think it's, what's the next generation going to need from the world? I don't know. I know that kids are getting handed devices at a very young age. And whatever you think, if you're handing your kid a device, their porn is coming up in the first day they have it, right? It just is. And that the porn that's on the internet is not healthy in any way at all. It's horrible. And it's, Time Magazine ran a story on 20-year-olds with impotence, right? It's this is a huge thing that people don't know how to relate anymore. And even though Tease-O-Rama and burlesque and everything is not really, to me, ever been about sex, it's still about that kind of interpersonal relationship. And the art of the tease is about the subtlety and the build-up and the connection. And by the time somebody like Dirty Martini takes her top off, you're in love with her, right? And that's missing from the internet. And so I don't know where it goes, but I still think live theater is the most important art form right now. And for the most part, probably, going back to Shakespeare's times, right? It puts us in the room together with other human beings. We're clearly going to lose movie theaters, right? We've already lost ours and White City lost theirs. And but theater, you can't replicate that, right? Like I said, I just watched our version of Hair and it's wonderful, but it wasn't the same as going all 11 shows in a row, like a ritual. It was incredible to be there live. And OSF, it's going to, fingers crossed, come back this year after 2 seasons gone. And I just hope people get in the room with each other and talk. And people kept coming up to us saying, Tease-O-Rama changed my life, because I was in the room with other people and I made new friends. And then they would go off, and the next year, all these people that would be applying would be like, well, I got into this because I saw your show and I wanted to be a part of it. That's awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.